What would you do if someone planted a professional-grade intelligence tracker under your car, and the digital fingerprint on that device pointed not to a stranger, not to a foreign agency, not to a random stalker, but to a contractor previously hired by your own stepmother's security team? This isn't a hypothetical. This isn't a script from a Netflix political thriller. This is the chilling reality Prince William allegedly faced the night of the Royal Variety Performance 2025. A night that should have been nothing but glamour, applause, and harmless royal charm, yet ended with one of the most disturbing security discoveries in modern royal history. And if you're wondering how something so dangerous, so precise, so targeted could happen at an event crawling with cameras, police, handlers, royal guards, and intelligence oversight, well, that's the question William himself reportedly asked. And the answer he arrived at is a lot darker than anyone expected. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Let's start from the moment the lights faded inside the Royal Albert Hall. The laughter of the audience still hung in the air. The orchestra was packing up. Celebrities were gathering backstage for their usual quick chats with the royals. William smiled, shook hands, made the polite nods he always does, the kind he perfected decades ago. But witnesses later said something subtle was off. His smile was a fraction too tight. His eyes were scanning a little more than usual. You know when someone is physically present but mentally somewhere else entirely? That was him. And at the time, no one had any idea that a silent alert had already been sent to the covert police technical team stationed outside the venue. An alert that would pull the night into a direction no one was prepared for. The thing about the Royal Variety Performance is that it isn't just entertainment. It's tradition. It's PR. It's a carefully choreographed annual reassurance that the monarchy is strong, present, engaged. But what happened after the show didn't reassure anyone. Not the police, not the intelligence community, and definitely not William. They all knew something wasn't right the second the device was found. The second they realized how it had been installed. The second they realized what the data logs revealed. And the second they realized the tracker's unique signature matched the exact same model used by private intelligence groups across Europe. Groups that don't take random contracts. Groups that don't make mistakes. Groups that operate only when someone highly placed is funding them. But there's another layer to this. The most disturbing layer, the one nobody expected. Because when investigators cross-referenced the device's identification code, they didn't just find a match for a private intel group. They found a match linking the device to an external security contractor used once, only once, by Queen Camilla's office. Not by the palace broadly. Not by the security detail assigned to all royals. No, specifically by Camilla's team for a particular event last year. An event that, at the time, seemed unimportant. But in retrospect, it was the breadcrumb that changed everything. And that's where the questions start to explode. Why was the same contractor being digitally tied to William's compromised vehicle? Why would a device model historically used for executive tracking, not surveillance, not basic monitoring, but full route mapping, end up hidden under the car of the future king? Why did the police technicians freeze when they realized what the device was capable of? And why did William allegedly whisper, "This wasn't random," before demanding to know who had access to the palace garage that evening? Now, before we go deeper, I want you to think about something. Imagine the scale of trust required to run a monarchy, the layers of loyalty, the people who move around the royals every day, staff, drivers, assistants, security teams, advisors, each one with access to information, vehicles, schedules, private rooms, behind-the-scenes interactions. Every layer is supposed to be airtight. Every access point is supposed to be controlled. So when something breaches that network, when something slips through the cracks, when something gets installed so cleanly that no one notices, that tells you everything you need to know. Someone planned it. Someone practiced it. Someone had help. And if William is right, if what he believes actually happened, then the sabotage didn't come from outside the palace walls. It came from inside. The detail that shocked everyone wasn't simply the device itself. It wasn't even the data it collected. It was the installation. Whoever planted it wasn't sloppy. There were no fingerprints, no scratches, no tampering marks. You know how certain tasks have a visible signature, a style or method that reveals who did it. This operation had none. It was surgical, cold, professional. And that's exactly why it scared the police. Because only someone who understands elite-level protocols could sneak a tracker into a royal protection zone without setting off one of the dozens of sensors calibrated to catch even the simplest interference. And that begs the question, who inside the monarchy has the training, access, and confidence to pull that off? When William stepped outside the venue toward his car, he didn't know about the silent signal that had already alerted officers. He didn't know technicians were already scanning his vehicle before he even got close. He didn't know his night was about to go from applause and handshakes to one of the most unsettling experiences of his career. But he did know one thing. Something felt off. Witnesses said he stopped for a moment. He pressed his lips together. He hesitated. It was small, tiny even, but instinctual. And sometimes instinct is the only reliable warning a person in his position gets. A police officer approached him. Quietly, calmly, too calmly. And that was the first clue. Officers usually give updates publicly or in the open, not behind clipped whispers. Not with subtle head tilts to move William away from the crowd. Not with that tension in their posture. Something was wrong before anyone said a word. And then came the sentence that changed everything. Sir, please step back. That sentence is not normal. It's not procedural. Royals don't get asked to step back unless someone believes there is a direct threat. And that's when William's expression reportedly shifted. Not fear, not confusion, but realization. You can almost imagine the gears turning in his mind. Something was happening, something targeted, something personal. Let's pause for a moment. Ask yourself, how does a royal car, one inspected daily, guarded hourly, and isolated from public access, end up compromised? Why did the device match a contractor tied to Camilla's team? Why did the police treat this as an active threat, not just a misplaced tracker? Because what they found was not a cheap GPS tag. This wasn't an AirTag someone slapped under a bumper. This wasn't a teenager pulling a prank. This was tech engineered for covert collection of movement, timing, and pattern analysis. Combined with internal access, it becomes the perfect tool for anticipating where William would be before he even arrived. Which is why the next detail matters so much. The tracker had already sent several data packets before it was found. That means it was collecting information during the day. That means someone was watching William's movements. And when investigators traced those packet transmissions, they discovered something unprecedented. The last transmission came from a location tied directly to internal palace operations, a place only those inside the system would know. In other words, the device didn't just map William's movements. It communicated them to someone with access, someone familiar with royal routines, someone who knew what to look for. This is when the story transforms from suspicious to disturbing. William, sources claim, reacted with a mixture of anger and disbelief once he realized the implications. But beneath the anger was something deeper, betrayal. Because if the contractor match was accurate, if the device ID check was correct, then the circle of potential perpetrators narrowed dramatically, and one name hovered over that circle with more weight than anyone else's. Camilla. Now, whether William truly believes Camilla ordered it, or whether he believes someone within her network did, we will explore later. But tonight, under those Royal Albert Hall lights, in that cold parking area buzzing with frantic technicians, William made it clear. He was not treating this as a coincidence. He demanded updates. He demanded logs. He demanded to know who had accessed the garage, who had driven the vehicle last, who had clearance codes, who had reason, who had proximity. And the responses he got didn't calm him. They escalated everything. Because every path investigators followed led back to the same unsettling conclusion. This wasn't the work of a random attacker. This wasn't an external threat. This wasn't a breach by a foreign power. This was someone who knew internal routes, internal timings, internal weaknesses. Someone who could bypass digital locks without leaving a trace. But here's the question that hangs over everything. Why would anyone inside the monarchy want to track William? What motive would justify such a dangerous, high-risk, and deeply personal breach? Was it political? Was it strategic? Was it personal? Or was it something far more complex? Something tied to the future of the crown itself? We don't know yet. But William, in that moment, believed he had one answer, an answer he refused to say out loud, but one that echoed through every decision he made afterward. And right when he thought the night couldn't get any darker, A technician approached him with a new piece of information, something they discovered only after analyzing the device's encrypted metadata, something far more terrifying than the tracker itself. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. What if the most dangerous moment of your night was the one you didn't even see coming? What if the real threat wasn't inside the Royal Albert Hall, but waiting quietly in the shadows of the parking area, hidden beneath polished metal and royal protocol? That's the part people never think about. The part William never imagined he'd have to face. Because when he walked out of that venue, waving to photographers and smiling for fans, he had no idea that the police weren't actually watching the crowd. They were watching his car. And the only reason he didn't step straight into it was because someone on the inside had already sounded the alarm. So let's pick up exactly where we left off, with William staring at a technician who looked like he had seen something he shouldn't have. Something bigger than a simple breach. Something that turned a glamorous royal evening into a silent, spiraling crisis. And as the cold air hit William's face, something else hit him too. The realization that whatever had been planted wasn't meant to scare him. It was meant to track him, predict him, follow him home. Why would someone need to know where the future king was going before he got there? Why would anyone take that risk? And if your own security team had to shield you from your own car? What does that say about the people around you? These are the questions that started forming in William's mind long before the police explained a single thing. But let's slow down for a moment and rebuild the scene the way several witnesses described it. The crowd outside the Royal Variety performance was still buzzing, still laughing, still replaying jokes and musical numbers. Cameras flashed. Barricades rattled with excitement. People were shouting William's name, hoping for a handshake or a picture. And for a split second, he almost went to them, almost walked toward the sea of phones pointed his way. But just before he moved, a member of his security detail placed a firm hand on his arm. Not aggressively, not rudely, but firmly enough that William didn't brush it off. That was the first sign. Royal security doesn't usually interfere with William's interactions. They know his rhythm, his instincts, his public persona. If anything, they adjust to him. But this time, they were leading him, directing him, controlling the angle of his movement like someone trying to guide a person away from a cliff without saying, "There's a cliff." That kind of behavior always means the same thing, threat protocol. William's eyes narrowed just slightly, and witnesses say he muttered something under his breath. Something short, sharp. He wasn't angry, not yet. But he wasn't clueless either. He knew something was off, but he didn't know how bad it was about to get. His car sat parked near the service entrance, a glossy, dark, reinforced vehicle built to withstand attacks most people will never even hear about. The kind of car that gets checked daily, swept hourly, guarded constantly. Nothing touches it without authorization. No one steps within a certain distance without being logged. Yet somehow something had. That's why the officers wouldn't let him get closer. That's why the technician looked like he was holding his breath. That's why 2 additional police vehicles quietly repositioned themselves behind the royal car, not to block the crowd, but to block any potential escape routes. Because when you find an unidentified device on a royal vehicle, you're not worried about paparazzi. You're worried about detonation. You're worried about interception. You're worried about coordinated movement. And William knew this. He had been trained for moments like this since he was a teenager. But nothing prepares you for the moment it actually happens. Nothing prepares you for the possibility that the threat came from someone who knew exactly how your protection detail works. As the flashing lights from police cars reflected across the wet pavement, the technician who had been hunched next to the rear wolf finally stood. Slowly, too slowly. His face was tight, focused, pale. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he made eye contact with the lead officer, a look that said everything without saying anything. Danger. Real danger. The officer quietly motioned for 2 more members of the tech team. William's detail tightened around him. A photographer nearly caught the moment on camera, but an aide stepped subtly into the shot. It looked casual, but it wasn't. Every movement from the guards became sharper, faster, more controlled. Only then did the technician step toward William. He didn't bow. He didn't greet him with a title. He didn't soften his language. Because in crisis moments, ceremony disappears. All that matters is clarity. "Sir, we need a moment." That was it. And William froze the way only someone who has just been pulled into a silent emergency can freeze. Here's the thing people forget. William grew up in the shadow of tragedy. Threats, warnings, security alerts, they were part of his childhood vocabulary. But this? A threat tied to someone inside the monarchy? A device matching the signature of a private intelligence contractor linked to Camilla's office? That wasn't just alarming. It was humiliating, infuriating, personal. Still, he didn't respond emotionally. He responded strategically. "What is it?" he asked. The technician didn't answer. Not directly. Instead, he gestured toward the vehicle. "We've located something under your car." And that's when William stepped backward. One step, then another. The officer next to him widened his stance, ready to shield him at any sign of escalation. But there was no explosion, no sudden movement, no visible danger. Just tension, thick, heavy tension, choking the entire parking area. The crowd still had no idea anything was wrong. The fans at the barricades were still shouting for selfies, still waving, still snapping pictures. But inside the circle of security, the temperature had changed. A silent storm was building. The technician held up a small metallic tool, the kind used to retrieve sensitive components without leaving contamination. And for a moment, William refused to look away. He needed to see. He needed to know. He needed to understand what level of threat he was dealing with. The technician finally spoke again. It wasn't placed there by accident. A sentence like that doesn't leave the mind quickly. It doesn't fade. It sinks. It presses. It echoes. And for William, it echoed against memories. Recent ones, of rising tension within the monarchy, quiet arguments, political disagreements, conflicting priorities, different visions for the future of the crown, all the ingredients of internal strain. But he still hadn't seen the device. Not yet. The technician crouched back down with two colleagues, and together they slid a small mirrored panel beneath the car. This is standard. It reflects hidden components without moving the vehicle. But the moment they angled it just right, even from several feet away, William saw something affixed to the undercarriage. Small, black, smooth, cleanly attached. Not a homemade object. Not a clumsy, improvised device. This was professional. That's when everything inside him shifted. Witnesses said William's posture changed. His shoulders stiffened, his breathing tightened, and he stopped blinking as frequently. These are micro signs of someone processing a threat on multiple levels. Not just physical, political, emotional. And then came the detail that cracked his composure. One of the technicians said quietly, almost to himself, "It's the real thing. The real thing. Not a tracker you buy online. Not a cheap locator. Not an amateur spy toy. But a privately manufactured intelligence tracker used only by elite security firms. Firms whose clients include billionaires, politicians, and covert operations. And only a handful of groups across Europe use this exact model. Which is why, even before the device was removed, even before the serial number was read, even before the ID code was cross-checked, William felt it. The suspicion, the dread, the calculation. Because if this device was what the technicians thought it was, then someone with resources, knowledge, and connections had put it there. Someone who knew his schedule. Someone who knew his route. Someone who knew when to strike. Someone who knew how to bypass security systems that have stopped everything from drones to explosive devices. And the most unnerving part? Someone who had access to him. Because this wasn't installed in a random parking lot. This wasn't placed by a passerby. This was done either inside the palace, or by someone who had access inside the palace. A palace where loyalty is supposed to be unquestioned. The technician finally removed the device. Delicately, carefully, as if he were disarming something volatile. William leaned forward slightly, unable to look away, unable to blink. And when the device came into view, cradled in gloved hands, the officer next to him inhaled sharply. This wasn't just a tracker. It was a high-level positional intelligence beacon, capable of mapping routes with alarming precision, capable of sending data to multiple encrypted locations, capable of running unnoticed even under heavy shielding. And inside this silent storm, William whispered something he later denied saying. This wasn't random. The technician didn't disagree. Instead, he said something far worse. "We think someone knew your route before it was finalized." Before it was finalized. What kind of operation plants two devices instead of one? What kind of person risks slipping into the orbit of a future king not once, but twice, with two different pieces of intelligence-grade technology, each pointing to different origins? And why would those origins contradict each other unless someone wanted them to? That was the question that quietly ripped the floor out from under William as the second discovery was whispered into his ear. But let's slow the frame right there. Right at the moment his life split into two timelines, the world before the second device was found and the world after. Up until now, everything pointed to Camilla's circle. The contractor match, the device model, the installation method, the timing, the access. Every breadcrumb seemed to lead toward the same path, the same implication, the same unsettling conclusion. But the second device? It didn't just complicate things. It shattered the entire direction of the investigation. Because the first device was a tracker, a watcher, a silent observer meant to map William's movements. But the second device, found wedged inside one of William's personal belongings, something he kept close, something he brought with him, was different. It wasn't a tracker. It was an audio device. High sensitivity, low signature, impossible to detect without specialized sweeps. A device used in corporate espionage across Europe. A device MI5 had noted in past counterintelligence briefings tied to a rogue firm known for black box jobs, operations designed to confuse investigations, plant false leads, and redirect suspicion. A company that, according to official records, had been blacklisted by MI5. Blacklisted, yet the signature on the second device was unmistakably theirs. Why would two devices from two different intelligence origins show up on the same night, targeting the same royal, in the same vehicle, hidden in a coordinated manner? Unless the entire operation was layered. Unless someone was staging misdirection. Unless someone wanted William to suspect someone specific while hiding the real motive underneath. And that's where everything starts spiraling into a much darker theory, one the investigators initially refused to say out loud. But before we get there, let's return to the scene. The technician holding the second device took a full step back before speaking. Not out of fear of explosion. This wasn't that type of threat, but out of fear of implication. Like he didn't want to be physically close to the person who now had to receive this information. William's eyes locked onto the small metallic object resting in the technician's gloved hand. It wasn't visually impressive. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even noticeable unless you were trained to spot it. But the moment the technician spoke, its importance became undeniable. "Sir, this one isn't the same origin as the first." William blinked. Once. Slowly. A tiny, controlled movement that made the officer next to him glance sideways, watching carefully for signs of rising anger or panic. "Meaning?" William asked. The technician inhaled uneasily. "Meaning someone wants you to think these two devices came from the same source." But they didn't. Someone planted conflicting signatures. Conflicting signatures. That's the kind of phrase that doesn't belong in a royal investigation. It belongs in intelligence briefings, covert operation reports, cases involving cyber infiltration and misinformation campaigns. "Someone is trying to send you in two directions at once," the technician said. Two directions. Two origins. Two motives. But why? Ask yourself that. Why would anyone plant a tracker pointing to Camilla's circle? And an audio device pointing to a blacklisted foreign-linked intelligence group? What's the goal? Confusion? Cover? A smear? A forced narrative? Or something much more calculated, making William doubt everything and everyone around him at the exact same time? Because a divided future king is a weak future king. A paranoid future king is a controllable future king. A frightened future king is a predictable future king. And someone was clearly counting on that. But before theories could take shape, before anyone could even process the implications, a sudden radio call from the perimeter broke the tension. Movement detected behind the secondary barrier. Instantly, 3 guards shifted. 2 police officers moved to flank William. An aide placed a steadying hand on his back. The technician froze mid-sentence, and William's entire body tensed. Because the only thing worse than finding 2 intelligence devices aimed at your car is discovering someone might still be nearby to monitor the chaos. For a brief moment, William wondered if the operation wasn't just surveillance. What if it was staged? What if someone was waiting to see how he reacted? What if the tracker wasn't the main device, but the trigger? These questions weren't paranoia. They were survival instincts. The perimeter officers moved quickly, sweeping the area behind the barrier. But after 30 seconds of scanning, the radio crackled again. False alarm. just a journalist trying to get closer. Relief washed through the group, but not for William. Because that moment confirmed something he had been trying to ignore. The car wasn't the only target tonight. He was. And while the technicians resumed examining the second device, the officer leading the investigation stepped toward William, lowering his voice. "There's something else, sir," he said. "We need to show you this." William stiffened. Not again, he thought. But again never waits. The officer pulled out a small, encrypted tablet, the kind used only in high-level protocol breaches. He tapped the screen twice, then rotated it toward William. On the screen was a timestamp, a GPS signature, a data log. The first device had sent movement data before it was discovered. Yes. But there was more. There were traces of communication. Outgoing signals. Incoming signals. Encrypted connections. Someone wasn't just tracking William. Someone was communicating with the tracker in real time, reading his route, reading his schedule, reading his movements, and responding. The tracker wasn't passive. It was part of a live system, a network, a coordinated surveillance pattern that someone built intentionally. Who received the data? William asked. The officer swallowed. That's where it gets complicated. Complicated. Everything tonight was complicated. We traced the last confirmed data ping, the officer said. It originated from a relay server overlapping with a secure communications node linked to. He hesitated. Linked to what? William demanded. The officer didn't soften it. Linked to internal palace operations. Silence. Not just silence, a void. A complete collapse of sound. It didn't make sense. Except it did. Because earlier that day, William's schedule had changed. His route had changed. His exit timing had changed. Everything had shifted slightly. Something that happens often in royal logistics. But tonight, someone outside his inner circle reacted to those changes too fast. That could only happen if the tracker wasn't just observing him. It was being guided. Someone inside the palace knew. Someone inside the palace fed the information. Someone inside the palace was part of this. And that realization hit William like a silent punch. His face didn't move. His shoulders didn't shift. His jaw didn't clench. But his eyes hardened. A glassy, shocked stillness that told the guards everything they needed to know. Trust had just left the room. One of the technicians stepped closer, clearing his throat nervously. "There's a secondary detail," he said. Something that wasn't obvious at first. William lifted his gaze. The two devices weren't planted at the same time. That hit harder than anything else. One device was installed earlier. One device was installed more recently. Two separate breaches. Two separate access points. Two separate moments of vulnerability. Which means the operation wasn't rushed. It was deliberate. Long-term. Layered. Anticipated. Someone didn't just gain access once. They gained access twice. Over multiple days. Or multiple weeks. Which led to the most important question of all. How long had William been watched? The technician continued, voice trembling slightly. The first device was attached between 24 and 36 hours ago. The second was likely placed within the last 8 hours. 8 hours. 8. That meant someone had been close enough to William's belongings that same day. Before he left for the Royal Variety performance. Before the car was even parked. Before he even stepped onto the red carpet. Someone inside his daily orbit planted something on him. Not on his vehicle. On him. And when William realized that, everything inside him shifted. Someone wasn't targeting the future king's car. They were targeting the future king. And suddenly, the tracker wasn't the nightmare. The implication was, because the question that now sat heavy in the cold London air wasn't who planted it. It wasn't why did they do this. It wasn't even was Camilla involved. It was something far more terrifying. If the first device was meant to point suspicion toward Camilla, and the second device was meant to point suspicion toward a blacklisted intelligence group, then who benefits from making William distrust everyone? And that question leads directly into the next chapter. The moment investigators uncover the real twist hidden inside the tracker's encrypted memory. A twist that forces William to rethink everything he thought he knew about the threat. And what they discovered next, no one in the palace was prepared for. What if the thing you thought was the nightmare wasn't the nightmare at all? What if the tracker everyone was panicking over? The one pointing to Camilla's contractor, the one already throwing the monarchy into quiet chaos, was actually hiding something deeper, something embedded inside it, something no one expected, something no one was supposed to find. Because when investigators cracked open the device's encrypted memory module, what they uncovered didn't just disturb William. It terrified him. And now we pick up right there. Right at the moment the technician returns with the scanner, holding it like it might explode in his hands. A question for you before we dive in. When a device is designed to track the second most important man in the country, what do you imagine its hidden layer contains? Location logs? Communication signals? GPS pings? Yes, all of that. But what if the most dangerous part wasn't the data it recorded, but the data it already knew? That's where this chapter begins. As William stood surrounded by guards, the cold air tightening the space around him, the lead technician approached, slowly, methodically, and whispered something to the officer standing beside him. The officer's eyes widened. Not dramatically, just enough. Just enough that William saw it. Just enough that William knew this wasn't another simple update. Tell me, William said sharply. The officer hesitated. That never happens. Royal protocol demands immediate clarity. But this time, the hesitation wasn't disrespect. It was fear. Sir, the officer began, we've found something else inside the tracker. Something encrypted. Something we didn't expect. William's voice didn't waver. Show me. The technician turned the screen of his portable terminal toward William. Lines of code flickered. Encryption keys. Scrambled metadata. A signature hidden 6 layers beneath the primary tracking module. What is that? William asked. It's a preloaded route map, the technician said. But not one based on your movements. William froze. What do you mean not based on my movements? The technician swallowed. It's a route map for a future date. A future date. Do you hear the weight of that? It wasn't following him. It was preparing for him. William stepped forward, shoulders squared, eyes locked on the screen. His breath fogged the cold night air. The officer enlarged the data sequence, revealing a series of coordinates. A full chain of locations. Stops. Turns. Landmarks. All time-stamped for a date 2 days in the future. Not today. Not yesterday. 2 days from now. Someone knew where William was supposed to be in 48 hours. And not just knew. Pre-programmed it. Pre-anticipated it. Pre-planned for it. How is that possible? William asked. The tone wasn't emotional. It was surgical. Controlled. Like someone dissecting their own nightmare. We don't know yet, the officer said quietly. The route doesn't match any public engagements. It doesn't match your schedule. That made it worse. Terrifyingly worse. Because royal schedules aren't random. They aren't improvised. They aren't created casually. Every detail is vetted. Every minute is planned. And if the upcoming route didn't match any official commitments, who created it? Who approved it? Who had access to William's private internal drafts? And why would someone plan a device with a future route, unless they were preparing to follow him, intercept him, or trap him? William's jaw tensed. He pointed toward the device in the technician's hands. Extract the route. All of it. The technician nodded and began isolating the data. Once the full pattern was visible, William scanned the coordinates. He recognized only 2 of them. Both near royal estates, but not ones he frequently visited. The rest? Completely foreign. Random. Meaningless. And yet, purposefully sequenced. Like someone was building a puzzle. A coded itinerary. A breadcrumb trail only the device's owner would understand. Ask yourself something. If someone wanted to track William today, why load a future route? Why feed the device information about a movement pattern that doesn't exist on the official calendar? What purpose does that serve? One possibility is horrifying. The tracker wasn't meant to monitor William. It was meant to lure him. But lure him where? And for what? Was it a trap? A rendezvous point? A staged compromise? A point of interception? William looked at the coordinates again, noticing something subtle, the spacing between stops. Each location was positioned exactly 15 to 20 minutes apart by car. Not random distances. Not natural travel. But intentional spacing. Spacing used in intelligence operations. Precision spacing. So this wasn't passive surveillance, William said quietly. This is an active operation. The technician didn't dispute it. He zoomed further into the data. That's when the next layer revealed itself. Each coordinate had an attached identifier, an alphanumeric code that looked meaningless until the technician rotated the device's screen and overlaid the letters with a second decode. And suddenly, the codes weren't nonsense anymore. They were employee IDs. Royal Household employee IDs. Not names. Codes. The technicians recognized several. So did William. They belonged to people who worked in his orbit. Personal aides. Event coordinators. Transport liaisons. These weren't outsiders. They were insiders. People with access to his schedule, his routes, his environment. The tracker wasn't logging their IDs. It was checking them, cross-referencing them. Why would a device cross-reference royal employees? Unless someone wanted to know which staff members would be present at each location. Unless someone wanted to know when William would be with certain people. Unless someone was tracking internal movement patterns, not just his route, but the staff around him. That's when William said the quiet part out loud. This wasn't about me. The officer looked up. Sir, it wasn't just about me, William repeated. Someone is mapping who I'm with. When I'm with them. Which members of my team rotate onto my schedule? Which ones accompany me? Which ones have access at specific points? His breathing slowed. This is surveillance for internal leverage. Internal leverage. The kind used to reshape influence inside the monarchy. The kind used to remove people. The kind used to manipulate power. The officer didn't deny it. And William's mind immediately went to the one person whose staff placement had recently shifted. The one person whose office had hired the contractor tied to the first device. The one person whose team had been undergoing security restructuring. Camilla. But before that theory could settle, the technician interrupted with something worse. Sir, there's another layer. Another one? How many layers did this device have? The technician wiped his gloves on his vest, nervously tapping the reset on his scanner. We decrypted the final code sequence. And we found a name. The air went still. Even the distant chatter from the crowd seemed to fade. A name? William asked. Yes, sir. He turned the screen toward William. The name displayed wasn't Camilla. Wasn't a contractor. Wasn't a foreign intel figure. It was the name of a royal staff member who had been quietly removed from Camilla's inner circle 1 month earlier. Someone who vanished from palace duties without explanation. Someone whose flat had been found empty earlier that morning. Someone who was now uncontactable. Someone who had full access to William's schedule at the time the device was allegedly installed. William stared at the name. The technician spoke softly. Sir, we believe this person may have helped plant one of the devices. William's pulse quickened. And the other? He asked. The technician hesitated. We don't think the same person planted both. The time windows don't match. The methods don't match. The access points don't match. Meaning this wasn't the work of one infiltrator. It was the work of two. Two separate agents. Two separate motives. Two separate directives. But somehow working around the same target. Unless a realization hit William like a silent detonation. These devices weren't planted by the same team, he said slowly. Someone planted one to implicate someone else. Someone planted the second to bury the truth. These devices are working against each other. The officer nodded grimly. Yes, sir. One was meant to point at Camilla's team. One was meant to point away from Camilla's team. Which means someone is framing someone. Or someone is trying to protect someone. Or both. And the deeper they dug, the messier it became. Imagine standing in William's position. Two devices. Two origins. Two motives. Two insiders. One missing staff member. And a pre-programmed map meant for a date that doesn't exist on any official schedule. What would you think? Who would you trust? Who would you suspect? Who would you fear? But before William could ask a single question, before he could demand answers, before he could even process the name on the screen, the technician raised his head suddenly, alarm sweeping across his face. Sir, there's something else. He tapped a line of code. A final fragment. A final anomaly. A final piece no one had noticed until now. The tracker had recorded its last data sync not 30 minutes before being found, but 5 minutes earlier. 5 minutes. Which means someone was receiving live information about William, even while the device was already in police hands. And that realization changed the investigation instantly. Because if the signal was still active, then the person monitoring William was still watching. And watching right now. And what happened next shook William more than anything so far. What would you do if you learned someone was watching you in real time, not metaphorically, but literally, tracking your movements while the police held the very device meant to feed them information? What if the person receiving your exact location wasn't miles away, hiding behind a screen in some remote facility, but close, very close, Close enough to adapt. Close enough to change plans. Close enough to react to every decision you made. That's where this chapter begins. With the chilling realization that the surveillance wasn't historical, wasn't passive, wasn't a log of earlier movements. It was active, live, ongoing, meaning the operation wasn't over. It was still happening. Right there. Right then. In that parking area outside the Royal Variety Performance, under the heavy sky, beneath the polished metal and floodlights, with William standing in the middle of it all, unaware of just how vulnerable he still was. The lead technician looked up from the tablet like he'd just seen something no technician should ever see during a royal sweep. He whispered to the officer beside him. The officer's eyebrows shot upward. He turned sharply toward William. "Sir, the device just attempted another data sync." William stared at him. "What do you mean just?" 5 minutes ago. The officer swallowed, meaning the recipient is still expecting updates. Let that sink in. Someone didn't just plant a tracker. They were actively waiting for the latest update. They were expecting it. They were relying on it. They were watching the feed closely enough to notice when the signal suddenly stopped. And that is the kind of detail that tells you everything about intent. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't passive observation. This wasn't amateur interference. This was a coordinated operation, a real-time monitoring system. Someone had been following William's every move. Not hours ago, not earlier that day, but minutes before the device was discovered and removed. And whoever it was still wanted the data, which means they still believed it was transmitting, which means they had no idea the police had intercepted it, which means William had a small, incredibly dangerous window of advantage. He could move undetected for the first time that night, but only if his next steps were calculated. "Can you trace the last sync?" William asked. The officer hesitated. "We're trying. The encryption is layered. It's bouncing through relay servers. Could take time to decode." "How much time?" "We don't know." Time, in espionage, is the difference between a neutralized threat and a catastrophe. And William understood that more intimately than anyone else. He had grown up hearing stories of plots, threats, briefings, foreign intelligence attempts, internal rivalries, political manipulation. He knew how fast information spreads. He knew how quickly an operation can pivot. He knew how fragile the safety net around him truly is. But tonight wasn't just another security threat. Tonight felt personal. Because this wasn't someone just watching him. This was someone predicting him. This was someone planning around him. This was someone whose timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Before anyone could say anything else, a second technician jogged up with a tablet of his own. His breathing was uneven. His face looked drained. "Sir, we have something else," he said. "We pulled deeper metadata from the first device." William exhaled slowly. "Go on." The technician tapped the screen twice and rotated it. At first, the screen looked like a wall of code. But as the layers separated, something emerged. Something the investigators had missed on the first scan. The device hadn't been communicating with just one recipient. It had been communicating with three separate channels. 3 separate encrypted nodes. 3 different endpoints. "Explain," William demanded. The technician cleared his throat. "It means the tracker wasn't sending information to one person or one organization. It was part of a network. Different nodes, different protocols, different encryption types. Someone built this to distribute information across multiple points. Multiple points. This wasn't an amateur job. This wasn't sloppy. This wasn't rushed. This was meticulous, carefully designed. Layered, meaning someone wanted redundancy. Meaning someone wanted the data safe even if one recipient went dark. Meaning someone was expecting interference, or at least prepared for the possibility. The officer stepped forward. "Sir, if the device was sending data to 3 nodes, one could be a decoy, one could be operational, and the third could be a firewall trap." "A trap?" William asked. "Yes, sir. A protective mechanism. If one node is breached, like tonight, the system may automatically alert the other nodes, meaning the people behind this might already know we found the device." The technician glanced at the floor. "It's possible, sir." The possibility hit hard. If the operation detected interference, then the watchers already knew they'd lost feed. And if the watchers knew they'd lost feed, they might already be adapting, adjusting, retreating, or worse, accelerating their plan. William ran a hand over his face, but only briefly. He didn't have time to show frustration. He had to focus. And his next question was the one everyone feared he'd ask. Can we trace the other nodes? Silence. Real silence. The kind where even police radios seemed to stop crackling. Finally, one of the techs spoke. We traced one node. It's based in the UK. Domestic server. And the others? Sir, the technician hesitated. One is bouncing through Eastern Europe, the other through the Middle East. The officer closed his eyes for half a second. The universal sign of this is worse than we thought. What does that mean? William asked. It means, sir, this isn't just an internal threat. It's potentially an international intelligence interference. International interference. That changed everything. Because if foreign intelligence agencies or private contractors hired by foreign interests were part of this operation, then this wasn't simply a dispute inside the monarchy. It was a geopolitical event, a quiet one, a hidden one, a dangerous one, and the tracker was just the surface. Why me? William asked suddenly. The officer looked startled by the directness of the question. Sir, William repeated it, more firmly this time. Why me? Why now? What do they gain from tracking me tonight? Why plant two devices? Why map a future route? What is the purpose? These questions weren't rhetorical. They were strategic. Because William understood something that many people forget. Everything done to him affects the monarchy. Everything done to the monarchy affects the government. Everything done to the government affects the geopolitical landscape. His movements weren't just personal. They were symbolic. Which is why the officer answered with the truth, or at least, the part of the truth he could state confidently. Sir, we don't believe someone was targeting you randomly. The nature of these devices. The network, the multi-layered encryption, this was coordinated. Someone wanted to know exactly who you were meeting, exactly where you were traveling, and exactly who was influencing your decisions. Influencing your decisions. That line hit like a blow, because it implied manipulation, or sabotage, or preparation for leverage. The officer continued. Someone wants to predict your next steps. Someone wants to anticipate your alliances. Someone wants access not just to your location, but to your political direction. William stared at him. My direction? Yes, sir. Why now? The officer lowered his voice. Because your position in the monarchy is shifting. Because influence is shifting. Because loyalties are shifting. And someone wants to get ahead of that shift. William inhaled sharply. He knew exactly what that meant. Discussions inside the palace had been increasingly tense. Strategies, succession logistics, future roles, house dynamics, power blocks. Camilla's team on one side, William's on the other. And something, or someone, wanted to weaponize that tension. Before William could respond, one of the technicians suddenly stiffened. Sir, he said urgently, we've got movement. Where? The officer demanded. The technician didn't look up. Here, on site. William's heart dropped into stillness. Someone nearby just pinged a matching signal. Similar encryption. Similar protocol. It's faint, but it's close. Very close. How close? The officer barked. The technician swallowed hard. Within 100 meters. 100 meters. The person who had been receiving William's live location was still here. Somewhere in the dark. Somewhere among the officers, technicians, journalists, backstage staff, or crowd dispersing near the barricades. Watching, listening, waiting. And the most startling part? The signal spike came from someone moving toward the vehicles. The technician's voice shook as he added, Sir, someone may be trying to retrieve the device before we realize what it contains. And before William could even process that horrifying possibility, the officer turned, eyes blazing with urgency, and shouted, Lock the area down. Now. Because the person behind this operation wasn't running away. They were coming back. For the evidence. For the device. For the truth William wasn't supposed to uncover. And what happened next forced investigators to confront a possibility so explosive, so destabilizing, so unthinkable, that it threatened to reshape the entire direction of the investigation. What kind of person risks returning to a royal security zone after planting intelligence-grade devices on the future king's car? What kind of individual willingly steps back into the jaws of one of the most tightly guarded areas in London? Police everywhere, technicians on high alert, royal protection officers with their eyes scanning every movement, just to retrieve a piece of evidence they should have abandoned the moment things went wrong? That's the question that pulsed through William's mind as alarms silently triggered across the perimeter, as earpieces crackled to life, as discrete signals passed through the security teams like electric sparks. Because you have to be bold, or desperate, or trained, or all three, to come back into a situation this dangerous. And the horrifying part wasn't that someone was coming back. It was the fact that they were getting closer. Right now, before anyone realized it. Before the police even finished sealing off the area. Before William had the chance to make sense of the network of encrypted nodes, the conflicting device origins, or the terrifying possibility that someone inside the palace had played a direct hand in everything. This wasn't a runaway operation. It wasn't a retreat. It was something else entirely. A retrieval mission. And retrieval missions don't mean we got caught. They mean we can't let you see what else is inside that device. Because here's the truth. When someone returns for evidence, it's because there's something even worse inside it. Something the investigators haven't uncovered yet. Something more explosive, more damaging, more revealing, more intentional. So the chapter begins here, with William standing beside his compromised vehicle, while the person who orchestrated the entire operation walks directly back into the darkness. Let's slow the moment down. The technician's voice shook as he repeated the line no one wanted to hear. Sir, someone is approaching the perimeter. The signal is moving toward us. It's closing in. William didn't move. He didn't panic. He didn't react physically, but something inside him tightened. A mix of instinct, threat recognition, and a deep understanding of how operations like this unfold. He said one word. Where? The technician pointed to the northwest side of the lot, a poorly lit section near a row of parked cars reserved for production staff. A place where shadows pooled. A place the crowd had already moved away from. A place where someone could blend easily for a moment before slipping closer. Then the officer in charge barked the command again. Lock the area down. Now. Police surged toward the barriers. Gates slammed shut. Security details repositioned themselves. A handful of journalists who noticed the change in behavior began lifting their cameras again, but they weren't the focus anymore. Something bigger was unfolding. Something dangerous, something immediate, something no one had planned for. William's protection team closed ranks around him, not in a way that restricted him, but in a way that gave him maximum visibility. Because he didn't want to be shielded. He wanted to see. He wanted to watch this person. He wanted to know. Is the signal still moving? The officer asked sharply. The technician checked again. Yes. It's steady. Someone's walking. Controlled pace. Controlled pace. Not panicked. Not fast. Not erratic. Someone was walking toward William's car like they belonged there. A technician lowered his voice. This doesn't look like someone fleeing, sir. This looks like someone retrieving pre-stage materials. Someone confident. Someone confident meant someone trained. Someone trained meant someone with experience. Someone with experience meant someone who had done this before. And that realization gave William chills. What direction are they coming from? He asked. The technician pointed at the production corridor used earlier that night by performers and VIP crew. The moment he said that, the officer's posture changed. Check staff clearances, he ordered. Check who left the building in the last 10 minutes. Cross-reference their passes. Now, another officer sprinted into the building. Something inside William clicked. The staff entrances, the backstage corridors, the dressing room paths, they had all been accessible earlier. Accessible hours before the sweep. Accessible before the devices were discovered. Someone could have walked through them unnoticed. Someone could have positioned themselves perfectly. Someone could have blended in. Because here's the truth. The Royal Variety performance is chaotic behind the scenes. Costumes, props, technicians, assistants, stagehands, security, performers teams, catering runners, camera crews, lighting teams, sound engineers, producers, drivers, hundreds of moving pieces. If you want to hide, you don't hide outside. You hide in plain sight. Inside the machine. Inside the chaos. Then someone's radio crackled. We've spotted movement on camera 6. William's head snapped up. Camera 6 covered the northwest corridor, the blind spot where earlier the technician had said the signal spike originated. What do we see? The officer demanded. Static. Flicker. A blurred figure walking between parked cars. Not running. Not hiding. Just walking. Zoom, the officer said. We can't. Someone's interfering with the feed. interfering with the feed. This wasn't a sloppy intruder fumbling in the dark. This was someone with skills, equipment, preparation. Someone who knew how to manipulate camera signals long enough to buy time, but not enough time to escape the full perimeter lockdown. Which direction are they heading? William asked. The technician double-checked. Straight toward us, sir. Direct path. 50 meters, and closing. The officer gestured sharply. Close the distance. Non-lethal response protocols. Go. Two tactical officers began moving toward the northwest corner, staying low, using vehicles as cover, advancing with precision. The technician kept updating. 40 meters. 35. 30. Then the worst thing possible happened. The signal disappeared. Just vanished. Cut clean. Not faded. Not weakened. Cut. Like someone had disabled their device. Or tossed it. Or handed it off. Signal gone, the technician shouted. We lost them. The officer swore under his breath. They're trying to vanish into the perimeter crowd. But William shook his head. No, he said quietly. They're not running. How do you know, sir? Because they want the device. And they're close enough to see us guarding it. They know where it is. They're coming for one thing. The device. But before the officer could respond, the radio crackled again. Sir, we've found something. An officer at the northwest corner reported. What? There was a person here. A staff badge. Someone dropped it. It doesn't match any of the show's personnel. A counterfeit badge. Professional. Perfectly printed. Nearly identical to the Royal Albert Hall staff badges. Except for one detail. It was encoded with a palace-level clearance signature. The ones used for royal staff. Which meant one thing. Someone had cloned a royal staff badge. Someone had entered the venue under false clearance. Someone had moved around the building undetected. Someone had accessed the backstage routes. Someone had blended in so well that not a single guard noticed. But there was another problem. William recognized the name on the badge. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a random alias. It wasn't a foreign identity. It was a real name. A real royal staff member. A staff member removed from Camilla's team 1 month earlier. A staff member whose flat was found empty. A staff member who vanished without notice. A staff member whose name was embedded inside the tracker's encrypted metadata. A staff member now associated with 2 separate breaches. And that's when William realized something devastating. Maybe the staff member wasn't missing. Maybe they were here. Right now. Watching. Approaching. Retrieving. But if they were here, why drop the badge? Why leave something behind? A distraction? A decoy? Or a signal? Before anyone could answer, another technician shouted. Sir, I've got something. Everyone turned. I rescanned the device's memory. There's a second layer of encryption. It's not just a future route map. What is it? William asked. The technician's face drained of color. It's a command sequence. A command for what? The technician swallowed hard. For the device to activate something else. Something external. Something we haven't identified yet. Meaning, the tracker wasn't the main tool. It was the trigger. And someone was coming back because the real device, the dangerous one, was still somewhere nearby. Hidden. Waiting. Maybe inside a vehicle. Maybe under the stage. Maybe among equipment. Maybe planted hours ago. But the command sequence meant one thing. The device in police hands wasn't the threat. It was the key. Someone needed it back to activate whatever the real objective was. And whoever that person was. They were close enough to retrieve it. William's heart pounded as the realization set in. This wasn't intelligence gathering. This wasn't surveillance. This wasn't leverage. This was preparation for an event, an undisclosed event, 2 days in the future. And the tracker was meant to be part of a larger mechanism. Find the second device, the officer ordered. Now. But the technician shook his head. We don't know what we're looking for. And then something happened that none of them expected. A phone buzzed. Not William's. Not an officer's. Not a technician's. But the phone found earlier in the possession of the missing staff member. The burner device they recovered from the badge drop site. It buzzed once. Then lit up. A single message appeared. No name. No number. Just text. 2 words. He's exposed. William's stomach twisted. Who was exposed? Him? Here's the question that should rattle anyone watching this unfold. What kind of infiltrator calmly walks toward the future king's vehicle using the same specialized tool that only police technicians and elite intel operatives should even recognize? What kind of person doesn't run, doesn't panic, doesn't mask their movement, but instead mimics the posture and confidence of someone who belongs there. That kind of person isn't guessing. They're executing. They're trained. They're prepared. And worst of all, they expect to succeed. This is where the story snaps into its next level of terror. Because when the figure in the counterfeit maintenance uniform stepped into the fringe of light, everyone froze. Not because they recognized the face, but because they recognized the attitude. That slow, steady confidence. That unfazed walk. That sense of belonging. That eerie calm. Real infiltrators don't sneak. They blend. And this one was blending with the precision of someone who had studied royal protocols long before tonight. William's protection officers tensed instantly. Their stance widened. Their hands hovered near their belts. They didn't shout. They didn't rush forward. They didn't alert the crowd. Because the worst thing you can do in a moment like this is escalate too fast. Panic creates chaos. Chaos creates opportunity. And opportunity is exactly what an infiltrator like this thrives on. But William's gaze wasn't on the uniform. It was on the tool. A compact, chrome-finished magnetic extraction wand, used for removing small embedded devices from narrow crevices. Exactly like the one the technicians had used moments earlier. And that's when William understood something chilling. This person wasn't just trying to retrieve the tracker. They were trying to retrieve something else. Something hidden beyond the first device. Something bigger. Something the investigators hadn't found yet. "Sir," the officer whispered beside him. "Do you know who that is?" William didn't answer. Not out loud. Because the truth was too disturbing to speak. He did know. Or at least, he suspected. Because the figure walked with the exact same mannerisms as someone he'd watched countless times at palace events. Someone trained. Someone disciplined. Someone who had spent years learning how to move in restricted spaces without drawing attention. It wasn't the missing staffer. It wasn't a contractor. It wasn't a random intruder. It was someone who had once belonged inside the system. A former palace insider. A ghost of the monarchy's own making. But before William could identify them, the officer barked into the radio. "Alpha Team, intercept. Intercept now." Two tactical officers broke cover, approaching from different angles to box the impersonator in. The figure didn't flinch, didn't turn, didn't even break stride. They kept walking, tool in hand, toward the underside of William's car. "Stop," one officer commanded. "Hands where we can see them," the second added. And then it happened. The impersonator froze. Not in fear, not in submission, but in calculation. They tilted their heads slightly, assessing the distance between themselves and the tactical officers. Assessing the distance to the vehicle. Assessing the officer's readiness. Assessing the extraction path. You could feel the tension stretch thin like a wire. What the infiltrator did next made every single person in that parking lot gasp. They smiled. A quick, sharp expression. Not arrogance. Not intimidation. Recognition. As if to say, "You're too late." Then they dropped the retrieval tool. But not accidentally. Deliberately. Because the real tool, the real object they intended to use, wasn't in their hand. It was hidden under their sleeve. A second device. A small, rectangular, flat module. And the moment it slipped into their palm, every technician shouted at once. EMP unit. EMP unit. An EMP, an electromagnetic pulse generator, small enough to fit in a